So caviar seems to be one of your newest ingredients that you're supplying. Tell me about the N25.
Caviar? Yeah, so N25 caviar is a caviar that is from sturgeon that are raised in China, and then after the eggs are harvested, they are brought to Germany to go through the aging process. Now the name N25 comes from, it's on the 25th degree of the northern latitude along the Yunnan River. And the reason why he picked this area to the sturgeon from this area is because the water there tends to be quite cool and cold. So the sturgeon tend to get a bit fatter, which means that the eggs will get more nutrients as well.
But what is it that makes N25 caviar so unique?
Well, actually quite a few different things that make it quite unique. One is the eggs are actually harvested from fish that are usually on their second or third fertility cycle. And what that means is that a sturgeon takes anywhere from 8 to 14 years to reach sexual maturity.
Does that depend on which species, or is it just?
It depends on the species. So things like the Osetra and the Shrinky will reach it within 8, but then when you talk about the Huso doricus and Huso huso, which is the beluga and the Kaluga, those tend to reach maturity around 12 to 14 years.
Kahuga, it sounds like you're about to break into a Beach Boys song.
Jamaica, Kaluga.
I wish I hadn't said that.
Yeah. Anyway. So along with that, the reason why you actually want to go through its second or third fertility cycle is the eggs tend to be better. It produces a better quality egg. You know, you have something
more consistent.
It's hardier.
Yeah.
So the first cycle, you have a thin membrane along the eggshells, and then they'll tend to break apart if you age it during the aging process. Whereas with the second and third cycle, you get something which is a lot hardier. You have a thicker membrane, so you can age it a little bit better. Also, the eggs will have, the fish will be healthier and hardier as well. So you get a bit more character in terms of the flavor complexity of the eggs themselves. Today, we're actually going to be trying some of the Osetra one, so you could.
And the Osetra is a really well-known species of caviar, isn't it? I mean, it's probably one of the most popular in Hong Kong.
It's the most common one that you hear about is the Osetra. Yeah. So everyone knows about Osetra, and everyone knows about the beluga.
Beluga,
right? So this is a purebred Osetra. A lot of the stuff you may sometimes find in the market, it's always important to kind of check the back to see what it actually is.
So on the back of the tin, you'll have what information?
So on the back of the tin, you'll find that this one actually will actually say right here, this little code right here will say that it is the Osetra. As opposed to some others, sometimes some people have taken other ones and called it Osetra, where they've, like some of the more common or other breeds that we do carry. We carry a Shrinky. We also carry something called a Kaluga X, which is a hybrid, which is a cross between two different kinds of sturgeon. They're all very good quality. It's just a matter that they all have different characteristics though. So with the Osetra, you have something a bit more salty, a bit more briny, kind of much more kind of fresh and oceany. Whereas opposed with something like the Shrinky, you have something with a bit more umami, a little hardier. Almost has kind of like a habugo ham sort of flavor profile.
Yeah, umami.
Yeah, umami. With the hybrid, it's you get slightly bigger eggs, a bit creamier. It's a nice cross between. It's a nice all-around caviar. And obviously, when you start talking about the Kaluga, which is the Huso doricus, you're talking about the large, beautiful eggs that have very nice membrane. They kind of they melt
really pop in the mouth.
Yeah, they kind of melt, pop in your mouth. It's like a little meatier in some ways. So.
Hey Jason, so after 8 years of working together, I thought it's about time that we did some cooking together.
All right, I'm pretty excited to, what are you going to teach me today?
Well, first thing is blinis. So blinis, a classic condiment for serving caviar, which is normally like a pancake batter.
Right.
I mean, my favorite way of eating caviar is just eating it straight off your hand, or in the classical way with bellinis. So that's why I thought today I'd show you how to make potato bellinis. So bellinis are normally like a pancake batter. So we make a potato version of it, which I think is lighter, and it's just a nicer way of showcasing the caviar. So we've got some potatoes. If you want to turn this on for me, mate. I think these are almost cooked. So we've had these boiling for about 20 minutes.
And I saw you poke it there.
So you can either use a small knife or a little metal skewer. I mean, once it goes in very easily, then the potatoes are cooked. I mean, you can have a go yourself, and you can feel it's not quite, it's going in, but there's still a little bit of resistance.
Right. And I see what you mean there. So and you want the potatoes to be around the same size.
Yeah.
Right?
When you're cooking vegetables, I mean, if you cook a potato that's 80 grams and one that's 20 grams, they're going to cook at different times. So for this type of recipe, when you're going to make a batter, you need all the potatoes to be cooked evenly and consistently. So pick potatoes around the same size, cook them nice and gentle. Just a rolling simmer, gentle boil.
Okay.
And then once they're cooked, then we need to just push them through a fine sieve, and then we add eggs. Creme fraiche is quite a classic complement for caviar, so we're just going to use unsweetened Greek yogurt instead.
So this, if you can find creme fraiche.
Yeah, if you can't find creme fraiche, you know, not many stores in Hong Kong have creme fraiche on the shelves, but you know, you can find unsweetened natural or Greek yogurt pretty much everywhere. So I just thought it's better to give people an option that's more readily available.
Excellent. That sounds easy.
This is a really nice
to
recipe to do with kids as well. I mean, if you wanted to smoke salmon or ham with these bellinis as well, if you don't have caviar, it's a really simple recipe, and it's something quite good for kids, because you know it turns into a batter and then you put them in the pan. So they're making little pancakes.
Oh, they're potato pancakes.
Potato pancakes, pretty much is what it is.
Love it.
Bellini just sounds much more posh, you know.
We are posh people.
Yeah, aren't we just? Okay, so these potatoes have been gently boiling in lightly salted water for the last half an hour. We cook them in the skins because we want to actually keep the water content low. If you were to peel them, then the potatoes will absorb a lot of water. So keeping the skins on is like a protective little jacket. So if you want to put the skewer in, you'll see that it goes in without any resistance. Are they all soft?
Yeah, so it feels like you're just kind of falling right off the skewer when you poke them. All right, Chef, I think these are finished.
I think they're done as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to drain out the water, and then we're going to see how tough your hands are. So one thing that chefs get after a long time in the industry are pretty tough hands. So we can play hot potato. Do you know how to play hot potato?
You're just showing off
You
right
want
now,
to play hot potato?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So skin on, just cut them in half. And all we're going to do is push them through the sieve, and then the skins will stay on the right side. So if you want to do that with the rest of the potatoes, mate.
Ooh, hot.
That's not that hot. Come on, Jason.
I thought you said this was child friendly.
Not this part. Okay.
So can you do anything with the skins afterwards?
No, not really, no. I mean, these skins on these new potatoes are very, very thin. It's not like a baked potato where it's thick and you can fill it full of baked beans and cheese and sour cream.
Oh, okay.
Good for the compost heat.
Ah.
Okay, so just get the rest of those potatoes. You need to do them while they're warm as well. If you let potatoes go cold, what happens is when you push them through the sieve, the starch turns very gluey.
Okay.
And it'll give you a very chewy texture on the bellinis. Okay, so what I need you to do, mate, is put that bowl on top of the scales.
Okay.
So we need to weigh out 250 grams. It should be most of that, to be quite honest. That's fine. So we need 2 large tablespoons of flour into the generous heat.
Okay.
Little pinch of salt. We put a little bit of salt in when we cook the potatoes, but just a little bit more. Okay. So what we're going to do now is use these spatula just to gently mix around. So you're going to do this, mate. I'm watching. Gently mix around. Going to add a couple of tablespoons of unsweetened yogurt.
Okay.
So here is the incredible Japanese eggs that we buy from you, the Tyrian eggs. I have never come across a better egg, to be quite honest with you.
They're beautiful, aren't they?
I mean, the pasta we make, the poached eggs we make, everything that we do with these eggs is incredible. So you just need to get this nice and smooth. With the potato, you don't want to over whip it. The more you move the potato, the more starchy it's going to be.
So you want to avoid putting this in a blender or
in a blender. Just do it by hand, so you have total control over it. Okay. So we're going to add a little bit of egg at a time. Okay.
You just slowly move this around?
Move that around, yeah. You add a little bit at a time. If you add everything at once, it's very hard to get this consistency very smooth. Okay, once that's all mixed in, we'll add a little bit more. I mean, the color on this is incredible. These eggs look like they have saffron in. When we make pastas or if we do scrambled eggs for any of the dishes, people always think, what have you done to the eggs to make them so orange?
Well, that's how eggs are supposed to look.
Yeah.
You know, I've been feeding my daughter these since she's been born, and you know, one day she came across some store-bought eggs, and she refused to eat them. She goes, I asked why. I said, Dad, these aren't the color of eggs. They're yellow. Yeah. I was like, you're right. They shouldn't be yellow. And that's, you know,
it's very hard to go back to a normal egg after eating the tire-in eggs.
Yeah. Well, the deep orange shows that it comes from a healthy chicken as well. You know, that's a sign that you're...
Just have a little look at that. So just make sure you scrape right around on the bottom, get everything incorporated. We're almost there. Okay, just going to add. So this is 2 eggs and 1 yolk. There you go. And the thing I like about these eggs is you can actually eat them raw, right? These are salmonella tested.
Yes. So they're actually, the shells are actually cleaned as they're packed. You know, one of the main reasons, or one of the main purposes for these eggs were to be used for sukiyaki. So
sukiyaki meaning?
Yeah. So it's a Japanese style of, you know, when you have the pot of soup or shabu shabu, you traditionally will eat it with a raw egg as well. Yep. Dip it in raw egg with a little bit of soy sauce. So he wanted to make sure that there won't be any dangers of eating raw eggs.
That's great. So that's looking really good. So you're saying I'm safe to taste this completely raw then, right?
You are.
Excellent.
How's it?
Great. It's a little bit, needs a little bit of seasoning. And we put a little bit more salt inside. I mean, this is a vehicle for the caviar, and the caviar has obviously got natural saltiness to it, so we just lightly season this. So now I've got a non-stick pan heating up. On the stove here, it goes up to a maximum of 9, so we're going to put it at around 6.
Okay, so you want a medium?
A medium heat, yeah. And to fry these, you can either use clarified butter or a non-scented vegetable oil or nut oil. So like a sunflower oil or a canola oil. I wouldn't use extra virgin olive oil because it's peppery and it's a waste of a very high quality oil. I mean, olive oils for us are more finishing, for saucing. If we're going to fry things, you want to use something that is not going to impart any flavor, and an olive oil will do that because of the pepper notes of the oil. So just once this is warmed up.
And would you recommend people touching the pan with their hands?
Possibly not, no. I think it's the chef impatience wanting to get everything going very fast.
Is there something you do with the oil in the pan too as well? Just kind of like...
I have done on occasions, yes. The thing about the bellinis, you don't want to serve them warm. You want to cook them and then you just leave them out. You don't serve them hot with the caviar. So this is, if you're going to do a dinner party or have friends around, it's something that you can pre-do before people arrive. And then just leave them on a plate with a cloth over the top, and then they're ready to serve. You know, this with these blinis with some caviar and a glass of champagne as an aperitif when people arrive for a dinner party is a great way to get a party.
Great and simple way. Yeah.
It is, yeah. Okay, you can see
Did
that
you bring the champagne?
Funny enough, yes, I did.
Oh, really?
Never leave home without it.
Excellent. Okay. So you want just enough oil to cover the bottom?
Just enough oil, cover the bottom, and then just, these are going to spread out a little bit, so not too close together.
So they'll slowly expand as they're cooking?
They will do, yes. You see starting to fry a little bit there. So I'll do the first round, you can do the second round. How's that sound?
So about how long do you want to cook on each side?
They're probably about a minute, minute and a half on each side. You'll see, I mean, these are, you need to be very careful when you're flipping these because they are quite fragile whilst warm. And as they cool down, they set a little bit. That's the nice thing about this type of blini. It's very light, it's very fluffy.
Okay.
You'll see on the outside of the blini, they'll just start to take a brown tinge. Once they've got that brown tinge, then you can flip them over.
Right.
So I've just turned that heat up a little bit. Okay, so it is the moment of truth. The blinis are ready. I'm starving. Okay.
Let's go.
Just tell me if you think I'm being a little overly generous.
Huh? You can never be overly generous with the caviar.
Okay, go for it.
Cheers. Wow, look at that color.
All that's missing is that glass of champagne or a shot of vodka.
It goes so well with the blini. It's just like so nice and light. Really.
It doesn't detract from the flavor. That's and then it's light. It's a really great vehicle to show off the caviar. I mean, I like just normal boiled potatoes with a little bit of sour cream and caviar.
Really classic combination.
Yeah, delicious. And it's great if you push the whole blini up onto the roof of your mouth. The eggs just explode, and you get this release of that saltiness. Oh, jeez, I need another one.
I should have brought a bigger can.
I think so. I mean, if you wanted to as well, you could put a little bit of creme fraiche or a dollop of yogurt, chives or spring onions on the top, but I mean, it doesn't really need it. I mean,
I'm a purist when it comes to caviar. Just like, I love just putting it on the base of the pan and just...
How did you find the recipe? Easy, right?
Simple. Even I could do it.
And you did.
I know.
Very impressed. I mean, I'm giving you high marks for that. They came out really well. Bit odd shaped, but you know, they taste good. That's the most important thing. They taste delicious, cooked well. Good job, mate.
Thank you.
Well done. Happy cooking. And now we get to the main event.
Steak.
The steak. And this is one mighty piece of steak, and is my favorite product that you actually sell is the Mayura Wagyu from South Australia.
Yeah. You know, it's a great product.
It's not only a great product, it's a great story, and it's when we tell the customers about the feeding process, and it always brings a smile and a bit of a laughter, and it's something that sticks in people's minds. So, I mean, let you tell that story.
Yeah, so the Mayura beef, I mean, one of the unique things about it is that the cattle are actually fed a diet of chocolate as a finishing off sort of feed. And the reason that kind of came about is when Scott, who's the owner of Mayura Station, was looking to develop the feed for the cattle, he wanted to make sure that not only was there a good amount of marbling in the beef, but he wanted to make sure that the flavor was really developed. So he had a Japanese breeder out there, and he was explaining to him that, well, Scott, you have to use this corn-based feed that they use in Japan, and he couldn't find it at the time, being in Australia. So he looked up the nutritional component of it, and what he found was very similar to candy and milk chocolate. So his neighbor, which in farming terms is a couple hundred miles down the road, was
just around the corner.
Yeah, was a chocolate plant. So he went to the chocolate plant and he asked, well, what do you guys do with all your broken chocolate? And they said, we just throw it out. So he volunteered to take all those broken pieces of chocolate, bring it back to his farm, and start feeding it directly to the cattle. And what that really did is it created a very unique sort of flavor profile and actually mouthfeel.
Also, it increases the sugar content in the meat, and that's why when we cook it, you get this incredible crusty caramelization, which is called the Maillard reaction on the beef on the outside.
Exactly.
So, and the thing is, this hasn't been dry aged, but it's very low water content. So when you cook it, you don't get that shrinkage and that seepage of moisture, which you get with some meats, particularly beef.
And a lot of that has to do is because the Mayura cattle put underweight naturally with a lot of the industrialized.
So there's slow growth.
Yeah. So the moisture content in the cells is not nearly as high.
So the way that I like to cook this Wagyu, and actually most of our meats, is to cook it at quite a high temperature and to turn it every 1 minute. So we've got a really hot pan there. What we're doing is we've got a timer. So we give it 1 minute each side. And this kind of steak, I'd say, will take probably between 7 or 8 minutes to cook. And then after that, we need to rest it. So it's really important. Meat is muscle, and when it hits the hot pan, those muscles constrict and tighten, and then you need them to relax again and to soften. So if the steak's cooked for 8 minutes, I would generally rest it for around 8 minutes as well. Resting it, it can just be on a plate. It doesn't have to be in an oven. Right. You can keep it in an oven at a low temperature, but
it'll retain its heat.
It'll retain its heat, yeah. While we've got this steak going, we're going to make a very simple relish called a kasundi. Okay. Kasundi is an Indian tomato relish with mustard seeds, cumin, garlic, ginger. It's like a
fancy ketchup.
Ketchup, pretty much, yeah, which I think goes really, really well with the steak. So you can see quite a bit of smoke coming off that. So there you go. That's the first minute. Turn that over, and you can just see that caramelization.
That's a lot of flavor.
It's right incredible, absolutely beautiful. So for kasundi, what we're doing, start with a little bit of olive oil in a pan. Then I'm going to grate about half a tablespoon of ginger. Medium heat, so this is on number 6. And the garlic, just want to toast it a little bit, about half a clove of large garlic in there. And then spices. So in these, I have mustard seeds, cumin, and a little bit of fennel seeds. So put those inside as well.
And all of those you can find at pretty much your local store.
Yeah, and if you wanted to put cinnamon, if you wanted to change around and put fennel seeds or coriander seeds, you can mix it up any way you want. Put a little bit of salt so you can hit that again. So I'm just going to keep turning. So that's 2 minutes. We're heading to number 3 now.
I can take over this.
You can keep an eye on that one for us. So we just want to roast the garlic a little bit. And those spices, bring out the flavors. Put a little bit of pepper in that as well. So there we are, we're just about to hit 3 minutes. I'm turning that back over again. So every minute, we're flipping that over.
And that helps cook it quite a little bit more
evenly. It cooks it evenly. That means that the temperature from both sides is going to be the same coming through. So the kasundi, you've got the spices here, just toasting a little bit. So we just, these are chopped tomatoes, probably about 250 mils of those chopped tomatoes. And all we want to do is we want to reduce that down. We want to intensify the flavor. So when it comes to steak, people always ask, how do you check a piece of meat? I mean, one of the ways I learned as a young chef was doing this kind of technique on your hand. Blue, rare, medium, and well done, which are the 4 cuisons in French cookery. Okay. You know, there is no medium rare or medium well in French cookery.
And really shouldn't be a well done.
And it shouldn't be a well done, no. But the way we do it in the restaurants is with a skewer. So what we do, you take the skewer into the core of the meat. You want to put your skewer into the center. And what we're doing is we're using the top of our lip. So if you want to take yours out, just put it onto the top of your lip. Currently, it's just at room temperature. So we'd want this to be medium rare. I'd say that probably needs about another minute. If you want medium rare, it's about 52 to 55 degrees centigrade. This kasundi will only take about 10 minutes. All we want to do is concentrate the flavor, like you would when you're making a...
So just simply reducing it.
Yeah. So it's just a touch of warm. Do you feel like just a little bit warm? Mm-hmm. Right. That is it. So I'm going to take that off. And all we're going to do is let that rest. So that's been in the pan about 6.5, 7 minutes.
So how long would you let that rest for?
I'd let that rest for 7 minutes before we cut it. If you were to cut that now, what would happen is all the blood and all that juice and flavor would just bleed out from the meat. So you let it rest, and you'll feel, if you feel it now, it's quite tense. If you were put into a hot pan at 250 degrees, I think you'd be quite tense and tight. So to garnish on this wagyu, we've got some romaine lettuce, just from the local wet market. I love lettuce as salads, but also charred and warm as well, baby gems or romaine salad. So these leaves have just been cut off the romaine and then put into boiling water for literally 30 seconds, just to soften them a little bit and season them.
So you use salted water?
Lightly salted water, yeah. And the salt that we're using is this Tasman salt, which you're bringing in from Australia.
So there's a natural sea salt that's from the Tasmanian Sea. And this is what's really nice about the salt is there are actually no caking agents that are used from it. And it's produced in the natural, old way of doing it, where they're pretty much just taking ocean water and filtering it. Yeah.
And the great thing about Tasmania is it's probably the purest water in the world. I mean, it's so far away from
There's really nothing.
everywhere.
There's very little maritime traffic in the water there, so that's one of the reasons why the water there is so pure. I mean, you get beautiful oysters, it produces great salt, wonderful seafood.
So I want these to char a little bit, get a little bit of caramelization. Alternatively, you could use choy sum, local market, Guyland. Smell that.
I love it. And this is also an important part of any cooking. Tasting.
Taste. So that's going to need a little bit of sugar and vinegar at the end. So that's the lettuce done. Okay, do you want to put the rest of those in the pan there for me, mate? Just need to be careful when you're making this kasundi that it doesn't catch on the bottom. And this is something you can make in batches and leave in the fridge. You can pre-batch this and it'll last in the fridge for a couple of weeks. So just in this kasundi, it's almost reduced down now. I'm going to put about just over half a tablespoon of sugar and a couple of drops of white wine vinegar.
You want to wait to use this to the very end?
Yeah, to the end, until you've got rid of most of the water out of it. And just use this as a finishing, just to give it that bit of acidity. I mean, the Wagyu is high fat, so it's nice to have something that has a little bit of acidity that can cut through that. Just want to reduce that down a little bit. We can have a taste of this. So I can need some salt as well. There's no salt in that yet. So just give it a little sprinkle of salt. We'll bring that down a little bit further.
So could you actually use this as a base for some bolognese or?
Yeah, you could do, yeah.
And you would advise always adding salt at the very end, correct?
Well, we add a little bit of salt at the start when you're cooking the spices, but you always, when we season, it's always checking. You put some in at the start, but you under-season at the start because you're reducing down the water content. The salt level is always going to remain consistent. The salt level never leaves the pan, the water does. So it's very easy to over-season. So it's better to be a little bit cautious at the start and then just finish the seasoning right at the end. It's going to put a little tiny bit more sugar in that. So you've got a good bit of acidity in that, right? I think it just needs a little bit of salt as well. Okay. I think that's pretty much it. Got a nice consistency. You see that there's no water leaching out from the tomatoes now. We've got rid of all the excess water. That means we've concentrated the flavor and then increased the umami, that delicious flavor. It's got a nice shine to it as well. And because we're going to serve this at room temperature, we'll check the seasoning again at room temperature. So we'll just let it cool down a little bit. Let's just tip that up. So now we're ready to serve. The steak has been resting for around 8 or 9 minutes. You can see that there's no blood running around all over the plate. It's time to cut.
I can't wait.
And see if we've got it right.
We got everything, all the garnishes finished. We got the lettuce.
Certainly the lettuce. We've got our Tasman sea salt that we're going to just sprinkle over the top of the beef. Looks great. Look at that.
You could hear that nice crunch too with the.
Oh, that caramelization.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And the problem is I don't think there's enough for you. So just going to re-season again a little bit. Some of that Tasman salt. A little bit of pepper over the top. That was only 7 minutes in the pan. So, and then seven minutes resting. Just a generous dollop of the kasundi.
Okay, I'm going to take this. And then, this is for me. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Right, so you get to taste first.
Thank you, chef.
texture and flavor of that beef is just outstanding. But the kasundi is nice, isn't it? Really nice. You got that ginger, garlic, the mustard seeds, the cumin, a little bit of acidity in there with the vinegar. It really cuts through the richness of the steak. That's a great plate of food, even if I do say so myself.
All right.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think I might do this professionally one day. Okay, we've had an incredible meal so far, a bit of fun cooking there. It's time for dessert.
Yes, definitely.
So we're going classic, we're going to the old creme caramel. It's probably one of the first dishes I ever learnt as a chef many, many years ago. And it's one that, you know, is still one of my favorites to eat and to cook because it's all about technique, using great ingredients. So we've got the Tyrene eggs, milk, sugar, and then vanilla.
Yes.
First of all, I'm going to get the caramel on, so it's about 110 grams of just white sugar there. Got a little bit of water, probably about 30 mils of water. We have our ramekins here that I've lightly greased. We're going to make quite a dark caramel and then pour that into the molds. While we're waiting for that caramel to come up, we're going to scald the milk with the vanilla.
Okay.
So that's 500 mils of milk.
Okay.
The vanilla bean, which is from...
These are from Papua New Guinea.
Okay.
So these, our supplier has actually spent 20 years cultivating relationships with actually the local farmers and the local tribes down there. And given over the past couple of years, there's been supply issues with the vanilla from Madagascar due to some typhoons.
Civil wars as well.
Yes, so he actually taught them a different farming technique so they could actually save more of the vanilla beans if a storm ever kind of came through again.
Okay.
So, you know, what you kind of look for in like good quality vanilla beans is obviously you look for this nice kind of shine that kind of comes through this kind of the oils. And then also like this sort of flexibility as well. So vanilla beans actually are quite large when they come off the flowers. And so this is just part of the dehydration process as well.
It's quite a long process as well, isn't it?
No, it's a very careful process. Because if you dry it out too much, then you kind of lose a lot of the flavor in the vanilla. But if they're left too moist, you don't get that flavor and concentration as well. And
this is quite an expensive product as well, vanilla. So, I mean, buying better quality, you get a lot more.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you get what you pay for.
So what I've done is I splitted the vanilla bean, used a knife to scrape out the seeds, but then I put the seeds and the whole bean into the milk. And what we want to do is we don't want to boil the milk, we want to bring it up to maybe 60, 70 degrees, and that heat just helps release all the essential oils and the flavors out of the vanilla bean. And then once that's infused, we're going to put it into the egg mix. So I've got 4 whole Tyrene eggs here, 2 egg yolks, and all I need for you to do is to weigh out around 100 grams of sugar. If you tell me when that hits about 100. It's not going to, is it? Just
almost there. Around 80.
There you go.
Yep.
Perfect. So if you can give that a bit of a whisk for me. When you put sugar on eggs, you always need to mix it straight away. If you don't mix it straight away, what happens is the sugar starts cooking the egg and you'll get lumps.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so always mix it in. Once you've mixed it in, that process doesn't happen anymore. So with the caramel, it's important when you're making a caramel not to shake the pan. If you start shaking the pan while the caramel is going through the different stages of softball until it starts turning into a caramel, it'll crystallize on the outside. Crystallization means it'll go to powder. And then your caramel's not really worth using after that.
So what heat? Are you using a high heat?
So I'm using quite a high heat on this. We're starting to get a little bit of light caramelization on the corners there. Once it starts lightly golden color, I'll take it off, and the residual heat with this pan will keep cooking the caramel. I quite like the caramel on my creme caramels to be quite dark. If you keep the caramel very light, then it becomes very sweet. The further you take the caramel, it almost becomes bitter. And I quite like that burnt, caramelly kind of flavor for the creme caramel, and the same for creme brulees. So you see, it's quite light at the moment, but that's going to keep cooking.
Right, so you actually want to take it off the stove top a little bit.
Yeah, so you can see as soon as the smoke starts coming off, take it off the heat. Right, I'm going to pour that, distribute that evenly between the 4 molds. Okay, that's fine. Obviously, be very, very careful when you're dealing with hot caramel. You know, it's extremely hot.
It will burn, won't it?
It will burn. So that milk, I just need to bring it up a little bit further. It's about 40 degrees at the moment. What we need to do is we need to let that caramel set. So 5 or 10 minutes while this is coming up to the heat to infuse, just leave it off the heat. Let those cool down, make yourself a cup of coffee or pour yourself a glass of wine.
An aperitif.
Or an aperitif while you're waiting. And this recipe, the creme caramel, can be made a day or 2 in advance. It does benefit from sitting in the fridge. It helps it set and then the caramel to soften slightly as well.
And just giving more time for the vanilla to kind of infuse as well.
Exactly. And the vanilla, after we've made this recipe, we'll strain off that milk. You can wash the vanilla bean itself and then dry it. So just put it somewhere warm in the kitchen or on the window ledge, let it dry and then put it in a tub of sugar. So if you get a tub of sugar, caster sugar, white sugar like that, and put all your vanilla beans, clean vanilla beans in there, what you'll get is a vanilla sugar, and it's incredible the flavor that goes through. Very nice.
Great way to make sure it doesn't go to waste.
Well, it's more economical as well, yeah.
Nice little tips and secrets from the professional.
I'm trying not to give you all of my secrets. Okay. So it's come up to about 60, 70 degrees. You can already smell the vanilla being released, the essential oils.
So at no point are you going to let it bubble? Or
it doesn't have to boil. This also helps the cooking process. So we're going to cook the creme caramel in a bain-marie, which is the old classic way of, it's a water bath, hot water bath. So you put it in a deep pan dish and fill it by about 2/3 with boiling water. And that just helps regulate the temperature in the creme caramel. We'll cook them at about 150 degrees centigrade for about half an hour. I'm going to turn the oven on. Okay, so you need to get a little chinois. Okay. So once that milk has cooled down a little bit, I'm just going to add it slowly to your egg, give it a good mix. You need to make sure that you stir all around the edges as well on the bottom, just to make sure that you mix all of that egg in. I'll just go around the sides. Sometimes the egg will stick to the bottom of the bowl. If you just keep whisking a little bit further, just to make sure that sugar's all completely dissolved. Okay, then we're going to pass that mixture through the chinois, just to make sure we get rid of any lumpy bits of the vanilla or egg yolk that may be inside. Pour quickly out. Have you made creme caramel before?
Never before. It's my first time.
Excellent.
I'm just getting sort of
So you see that
beautiful color.
Yeah, the vanilla. Just run that under the tap, dry that in your kitchen, and you can use that again another time. So now that the caramel has set inside, you can see, not running anymore. Take the egg mixture. Don't fill it right to the top, fill it to the edge of that rim there. Okay, and then we want to get some boiling water. Better to start with boiling water, then the cooking process is a lot quicker. If you put cold water in, it'll take a long time, because that egg mixture is already at about 45, 50 degrees. So
and the egg will start cooking at around 65?
65, yeah. So very, very careful with that boiling water. So the oven's at 150 degrees centigrade, just with a low fan. Carefully put those inside. And we'll check those in about half an hour.
Excellent.
Creme caramels have been in the oven for about half an hour, so let's just take a little look.
So, chef, when do you know when they're finished?
something. You can do these in a dry oven as well. This is the classic way to cook creme caramel or creme brulee is in a bain-marie. Bain-marie is a hot water bath. So you have just tap the side of the dish. You see that it's just set.
Okay.
This one here is just a little bit under. This one there is ready. I won't ask you to do that because they're quite hot.
I got tender fingers.
Set. There's no wobble on the top. We'll let them cool down for about 20 minutes in the bain-marie, and then what we'll do is we'll transfer them to the fridge. So they need to set for at least 3 or 4 hours. You can make these the day before, even the day before is better because the caramel needs to soften and then the egg needs to set.
And after they're set, they'll just fall right out of the dish.
After that, you run a knife around the edge, tip it down on a plate, and then you hope for the best.
Okay.
Well, these little babies have been sitting in the fridge for about 3 or 4 hours setting up after being in the oven.
So what's the final step there?
Well, now you have to have a little bit of faith. And so just run a knife very carefully around the edge. Try not to cut yourself. Then grab a bowl. And this is where you need to shake a little bit. Can you hear that sound? That's usually a good sign. Yeah. There you go.
Oh, look at that. You know what you're doing.
Do you want to have a go?
Huh? Voila.
Et voila. And you speak French as well. How impressive. Okay. Well, you get to eat yours. I'll get to eat mine. Bon appetit.
Oh, thank you very much, Chef.
You're welcome.
Very nice. Just like that nice little caramel.
The nice thing about when you take the caramel that far is it's not sweet. I'm not a huge fan of overly sweet desserts, which the creme caramel can be at times. But this, the caramel really, the dark caramel counterbalances with the sugar.
I'm Celine from Switzerland, and obviously as a Swiss I grew up eating a lot of chocolate, but I didn't really go into it before meeting this guy.
I'm Amit, I'm from Israel. I was always into chocolate, but I can't say I got this deep into it until I met you. We were both personally passionately into cooking, but I think together we went into areas which we were less comfortable with or less experienced with before.
Yeah.
And we have very different approaches to doing that. I think that dynamic is what you leaned into.
We started by making chocolate just because we wanted to experiment with mixing chocolate with spices. And we were a bit frustrated that we couldn't find good chocolate in Hong Kong. So we started by melting Lindt bars and infusing spices into it. Obviously we didn't understand how chocolate works, so the bars turned out really ugly but tasty. And we served it to some of our friends at dinners. But I went back home to Switzerland and I did a course from bean to bar. And that got me pretty excited. So when I went back to Hong Kong, I was told I made, okay, we need to order some beans and get trying with this. So we ordered beans from the US first, because that was an easy way to source beans. We experimented a bit at home, but we soon realized that we need a machine, at least a small machine to get started. So we ordered this machine, and then it took us about 6 to 8 months to define the process, obviously watching a lot of YouTube videos and understanding the process from bean to bar and testing different ways of making it.
You can get started in your home kitchen. You can do it yourself. When you went to Switzerland and you came back, one of the big revelations was we need this one machine.
Yeah.
we could have, at a non-commercial level, we could have done things without it, and even that wasn't like a big investment. It is quite a surprisingly accessible food to make. And we actually had orders before you left and before we knew what we were doing. It's quite an artistic thing in that way.
Yeah.
But then once we got started, we realized that the world just widened so much, and there was so much more variables to look into, and so many ways of manipulating them. It was very interesting how many different ways you can look at the same product, and how it's everywhere, but no one thinks of it in so many ways.
Yeah, we had a few hurdles along the way, especially sourcing cacao. I mean, that was, I think, our first obstacle. We were like, okay, how are we gonna get cacao beans? Because we had ordered a few from the US as samples, but then we're like, okay, we need to find a farmer to work with and a reliable source, ideally closer to where we are. And this is how we found the farm in Vietnam that we now work with. But I remember at the beginning, we were like, how do we put cacao on a ship to Hong Kong? We had no idea how to do that.
Particularly with food and beverage, we've had a lot of very good advice. I think the personality is attracted to that field, they're curious. And particularly with sourcing, it was a daunting one because it's trying to control something outside of our kitchen, and that was more complicated. Picking up the phone and hoping that someone in another continent is going to help us. Which, especially as a small business, it's a thing to get through. Another challenge that was out of our control was tempering, because there's variables that humidity in the air, things that we don't know how to control right in the beginning. I think that one was a hurdle.
We spent a lot of time, a lot of night crying in the kitchen actually over tempering, just because you think you get all the parameters right, the temperature, the timing, and the bars come out wrong. So there's a lot we didn't understand at the time, and we actually have a notebook with all the experiments we did. But the frustration was that even if you repeat the experiment with the same parameters, sometimes it will turn good, sometimes it will turn bad. So that was a bit of a hurdle, yeah.
That phase in the beginning where you don't fully understand what you're doing is very valuable. So if you decide to make chocolate yourself or anything else that's quite complicated, what I suggest is that phase in the beginning where everything is going wrong, keep either physical notes, which is most your style, or keep a memory of it and then bounce off it later on, because as you later understand what you're doing, that phase is you're going to refer back to it a lot, to things that went wrong that now teach you what you should do.
Also, chocolate is complicated because there's a whole science to it, obviously, but it's also of an art in the sense that you need to rely on your sense of smell and tasting the chocolate to know when it's correct, because the numbers, the temperature, the time is not going to be enough to make perfect chocolate.
Bean to bar, as much as it starts when we receive the beans, there's actually, I would argue, the most important stages before that. The process really starts at the plant. So anything that happens afterwards, we're really just manipulating what Mother Nature gave us. We can't do much to edit cacao. What we can do is bring out what we want, and a big part of that process is that stage that's at the farm. That is the fermentation and the drying. So when cacao pods come off the tree and get opened up, inside you have cacao beans that are coated in sugar and yeast. That's the recipe for fermentation. So two different farmers with the same plant, at the same time, with the same harvest, would come up with a different tasting product. The same farmer, in a farm across the road from him, would come up with something different because of the difference in the humidity, in the soil, it's infinite, the different outcomes that are possible. So going back into the process, we end up with a wooden box full of cacao beans that are coated in sugar and yeast. The yeast eats the sugar. What comes out is alcohol and acid and a development of flavor. The starches are affected, the fats are affected. We end up with something slightly different. It takes about 3 to 5 days. The farmer constantly mixes the beans in the box. In our case, our farmer is using a wooden box inside a wooden shack, and the wooden box has banana leaves and newspapers on top. It could be rubber. There's an infinite really choices. The farmer becomes a bit of an engineer in this. So the bacteria doing its activity brings up the temperature to a certain level, which also affects the flavor. And the farmer every day mixes those beans to bring oxygen in and to reduce temperature.
Yeah, so once the beans are fermented, they're put on the drying racks, which are usually outside under the sun, and the beans is let to dry for about a week. Obviously, the drying time depends on the condition, the humidity, the sunshine. You can't really control that. And it takes about a week also to dry. It's a bit of a tricky process because the bean continues to ferment. So if the beans dries too fast, then too much acidity will remain. And if it dries too slowly, then some mold can form and it can actually ruin the bean. And interestingly, the second bag we received of cacao, it tasted so differently that we called up the farmer and we asked him, this is not the same cacao. And he says, yes, it's actually the same one, but because of the drying process taking more time, because it was more humid, it rained more, the cacao tasted completely differently. And we had to actually change our process to make sure that the end chocolate would taste what we like. So it takes a bit of playing around with the cacao once we receive it from the farmer. So cacao grows on trees. The trees grow in basically 1 degree north and 1 degree south of the equator. So countries like Mexico, Peru, Côte d'Ivoire, and then in Asia it's more Indonesia, Malaysia. But because of climate change, now cacao grows in a bit of a wider region. So China and India are also growing cacao. The tree itself can go really tall, but farmers trim it down so that they can harvest more easily. And it takes about 3 to 4 years to become mature and be able to harvest the fruits.
The pod is actually a fruit. So cacao is a tree fruit. The pod itself, when you take it apart, it's got very thick skin. When you take it apart, you've got inside the seeds, which are these beans, which are coated in sweet white pulp. It's made of sugar and yeast, which means it's just ready, plug and play for fermentation. We'll get into that when we talk about fermentation. Another really interesting thing is that the DNA of a particular pod is not the same as that tree. So there's a big variety of cacaos out there. Farmer that wants to be intentional about their farm will select different breeds for different flavor, for different resistance to wind or to disease or to climate or to humidity, and will combine 5 or 6, sometimes more, sometimes less, that create his flavor in his farm or her. It's an artistic process, but a scientist normally is the one that determines these things. But then if you zoom out, there's actually 3, I want to say, species of cacao that exist in the world.
Yeah, there is Forastero, Trinitario, and Criollo. And actually in 2011, they found a 4th one, which is Nacional. And this is deep into the jungle in Latin America. So, but actually now we know that there is around 10 different species of cacao. And I think some of them are still not discovered. So it is really exciting for chocolate makers because makers love to talk about origin and where they find their beans. So you can still go deep in a jungle and find a very rare bean. Within the different species, you have the Criollo that is very popular because it's rare and it's actually white. So usually cacao beans inside are purple, brownish, but the Criollo is distinctive because it's white and the flavor is actually more tamed. Then you have the Forastero, which is what they grow usually in Africa. It's more robust, it tastes a lot like chocolate, deep flavor. Trinitario is actually a mix between Forastero and Criollo, so it's a bit more balanced. It's the most widespread because it grows more profusely, I guess.
Similarly to wine, it's not just about the plant and the DNA of the plant and how much you water it, but also different countries and different microclimates of different soil within the same country could create different flavors. A part of what we aim to do is to bring forward the terroir of a certain region, to create a world where these guys can have a brand the same way as wine. I think for the farmers to have that reputation could be beneficial for the chocolate, could be beneficial for the farmer, could be beneficial for the customer to know what they're buying and be able to be intentional about this as well.
There's actually 2 types of cacao. There's the bulk cacao, and this is where the big manufacturer come to one country, one co-op, and ask for a certain quantity of cacao. And then you have the Forastero, which is what they grow usually in Africa. It's more robust, it tastes a lot like chocolate, deep flavor. It's the most widespread because it grows more profusely, I guess. Similarly to wine, it's not just about the plant and the DNA of the plant and how much you water it, but also different They don't really care for the quality or what type of cacao they're having. They just want a low price. And then there's the specialty cacao, which is what the bean-to-bar maker focus on. And this is usually from smallhold farmers that may work with the co-op or not, and usually understand more about the process of transforming cacao, focus on quality, usually also much smaller batches, but high quality batches.
When we talk about any crop that is farmed at mass, there are different ways of looking at it. Very often the word fair trade comes to mind. If you were to make wine out of grapes you got in the market, from just a variety of grapes, it wouldn't be bad wine, but you want to be intentional about the terroir of the wine that you're making. So that's one thing that we look at. Another one is the process, which is not just how to make as much of the plant as possible, but how to make it. We talked earlier about the scientist who gets involved in the process. Also create a certain flavor. If you look at a free-for-all versus fair trade as standard that is negotiated between the corporates and the authorities, you do end up with certain rules. But when we look at, for example, the farmer that we deal with in Vietnam, we go right to the farmer. He runs the business. We ask him, what's the cost of your product? He tells us the cost and we pay it. He's allowed to grow his business because just like us, he has his own limitations and aspirations. This is important for bean-to-bar makers. It might be difficult to scale this model, but it does allow that end of the process to prosper, which means that we actually get better quality stuff.
Actually, fair trade doesn't always apply to smallhold farmers. First of all, they can not necessarily pay for the certification. And sometimes for the fair trade, at least they have a minimum of a size that they need to produce, which smallhold farmer can't reach. So fair trade doesn't necessarily apply to this. But usually the maker would pay a higher price than the fair trade.
Significantly higher
Price,
than
yeah.
what? Yeah, because fair trade is negotiated with the companies that end up buying, whereas we go to the farmers, we end up paying a lot more, but then we also get something entirely different, like a craft
Exactly.
product.
There's also a few companies, like Uncommon Cacao, that aggregates the beans from smallhold farmers. They focus on Latin America and they work with very rare origins, very small farmers, and they help them build their own operation and improve their processes and their quality. And then they gather all the beans and they ship it all around the world to chocolate makers. So I think that would be a good place to start. But then yes, identify origin, maybe farms, reach out to farms. We found one on Facebook in the Philippines. They sent us a sample. We love the cacao, and then we work from there, right? How to work together, how to ship the beans. And they're really open to helping us out, and then they love it if we come to the farm and then they teach us about the process. And I think that's really important, is to go to the farm, talk to the farmer, establish that relationship and understand the process at the farm, because there's so much that is happening before we even get the beans.
So step one, I would say, is try chocolates from different places and see which one speaks to you, and try cacao from different places. So Uncommon Cacao is one option. Chocolate Alchemy is another one. They actually have a subscription that gives you cacao from different regions that guy curates based on what he likes.
Yeah.
And the first stage of choosing which one is right for you is knowing what you like, and for that you have to develop your taste. So try a lot of chocolate, try a lot of cacao, order samples from everybody, start narrowing it down, and try not to use a process of elimination, because then you're just thinking about what you don't like. But look for things that make you excited. You don't need to get married to one type of cacao forever. You can find something that you like and develop it. We know someone that seasonally changes it.
Mm-hmm.
We know people that have a range of 10 different cacaos that they like. We're focusing on one from a farm in Daklak, Vietnam, because we really love what that farmer does and we want to bring the best out of it. And that's our own process. Maybe one day we'll reach a point where we want to try something else.
Yeah.
So when it comes to how to start, try everything, see what gets you excited, and follow that road until you suddenly have a bar of chocolate.
Yeah.
Here.
And trying the beans alone is not enough to tell you if the chocolate is going to be good or not. Remember, we tried one bean from Belize. We tried the bean, we tried to make chocolate with it, couldn't do anything with it. We're like, oh, that's probably not a good bean. And then we tried the chocolate from the exact same farm,
Mind-blowing.
and the chocolate was delicious. So it's also about tweaking the processes to make it work for that bean. So we found our farm in Vietnam a bit by chance. I went on a solo holiday to Hoi An, And I went to a coffee shop and I saw little packs of cacao beans in the coffee shop. So I take a pack and I read the name of the brand. I go online, Google them, I found a phone number. So I asked the lady from my hotel to help me with translation. And finally we agreed that he would send me 2 samples of beans to the hotel. He came actually with his motorbike to bring me 4 kilos of chocolate. And I came home and then we transformed the cacao, and one of them we really liked. So we went back to the farmer by email, everything was done by email. And we asked them like, okay, can you ship this to Hong Kong? And he said, yeah, no problem, I can put 50 kilos on a plane. And it was also the first time that he shipped cacao outside of Vietnam. We still work very closely with him and hopefully ordering a big shipment soon.
One thing I'd like to add is, depends on where you are in the world. When you go on the internet and look for where to source cacao, there's going to be answers. These answers are driven by business. Yes, you can look into them because people have preferences, but beyond that, look at what's nearby you, because if we can save some fuel and save the planet just a little bit by sourcing things nearby, that's great for that reason. And also, a lot of people are making chocolate from the same cacao. If you can find a farm nearby you that has a good thing to start working with, and maybe it's not so big and you can even work with the farmer and ask him to ferment your cacao a certain way, or for more information about what somebody else does with the same, you can form a relationship, which is so much more valuable than having something very popular. And if you get to do it somewhere nearby, you can also visit the farm. There's so many benefits to going nearby that everyone's going to go to Peru first of all. Everyone's going to go to Brazil. Look for places that are unique, not just because the name is cool or because you've heard about them before, but there's something really tasty in it. And that's what you're striving for, really. Something really tasty. If you can achieve that with a good, healthy supply chain, you're doing something nice as well.
The first step in the bean to bar process is roasting. This is actually a very important step because you will define the flavor of the chocolate. So we started by roasting in a home oven. We took a glass tray and put 1 kilo of cacao, and then playing with the temperature to reach the roast that we want. Actually, when you roast in a home oven, what you look for is a smell of brownie and hearing the pop of the cacao. And that's more or less when you know you reach the right temperature. But again, the problem with a home oven is that the temperature constantly changes. So even though you might reach the right temperature, you don't know if it's really ready. You need to look for the for the smell of brownie, and you need to taste it all along, basically. So we started in the home oven, and then after a while, we figured out that it's not very reliable. We're limited in terms of quantity. So we looked for a bigger solution, and we found Forrest from the Coffee Moment. Forrest is an expert in roasting coffee and tasting coffee, and she really helped us to define our flavor profile and figure out what we wanted out of this cacao. And we now outsource the roasting to her. So she's going to explain to us how roasting with a professional machine works.
For this machine, it's 1 kg maximum. So usually we put the half of it, of the capacity, and we need to switch on the machine to preheat it. Until it reached the optimal temperature, we put the cacao inside. And then we have our curve. It is the profile that we like to bring the flavor out. You need to know the flavor of the cacao through some testing. And once you know the flavor will come out, you try to adjust and modify it through you develop the profile. Once the profile is developed, you try to monitor it throughout the whole process, like how, like the temperature you put the beans in, and when the temperature reach the bounce back temperature, you need to input more fire to increase it, and then you develop the flavor. After certain of time, and then it will burst, and then you take out the bean.
So you look for all that pop sound?
Yeah. We call it
Yeah.
we call it cracking.
Cracking.
Yeah.
And this is when the cacao is ready.
Yes.
Is it similar in coffee?
Yes, it's similar because they are fruits and plants, but it is the shape is very different, so it's hard to control the heat they absorb. Yeah.
So you taste it along the way, or you smell inside, or how do you tell?
We check the smell and throughout the experiments that we accumulate.
Yeah, interesting. Because when we roast it in the oven, what we were noticing is that when you put the cacao first, you have a lot of acidity coming out. So you need to kind of like let the acidity and the humidity come out of the beans, and then you have some more subtle flavors and notes coming out of this.
Yes.
Is it the same with the roaster? You like first let the acidity out and then look for the more delicate notes?
Yeah, it really depends on the profile. The shorter time will be a higher acidity, and if you put longer time in the roasting, it will develop more sweetness and bitterness flavor. Yes,
What do you think about this cacao bean? Is it tasty?
it's really, really tasty.
Actually, I found the taste of the cacao changed after we used your roaster. Because when we first roasted, and you said that as well, we under roasted it, right? We thought like the roasts were fine, the smells and the aroma were correct, but actually when we showed it to you, you were like, oh, this is not roasted. And after that you roasted it, we found that the cacao has a bit of acidity at the beginning, and then there's a very strong nutty flavor that comes at the end, right?
Yes.
It tastes like peanuts at the end almost. And it's
Yeah.
crazy how a completely different roast can taste different, right? It will make a different chocolate.
Yeah, because it absorbs the heat more even, and yeah. The graph will be localized these, so we put a desired temperature. We preheating the drum to 170, and then we put the cocoa inside, and it will drop dramatically because it is from room temperature to absorb this 170 degree. So to a certain degree, usually is reach around 100 degree, it will bounce back because the machine is going to input the heat for it. And then the curve goes like this, and we like to develop flavor in this period. So when reach certain temperature, like 120, the cocoa absorbs enough heat and it cannot tolerate anymore. It will burst, and you will hear a very loud cracking. It is what we call crack.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's very different from coffee because coffee have two crackings and cocoa only have one. And because of the shape and the size is very different, the cracking is really loud. It's like brewing a steak. If you go down and you go up, if you do not control it well, the inside will not done. It's still warm, and it will not develop the flavor that you like.
Once your cacao is roasted, the next stage is taking the husk off the nibs. So the inside of the cacao is called nibs. It breaks down into little nibs. The outside is the husk. This is important because husk doesn't break down in your mouth. So the higher the percentage of husk in the chocolate, the more dry and gritty and difficult to chew and melt it is. The industry standard is below 1.5%. We aim to below 0.5% by weight. Now husk is very light, so by weight that's actually not too difficult to achieve. I think it's a very big scale that becomes slightly more complicated, but where we are right now, once we do the winnowing process of separating them, we actually by hand, with our eye, just pick out the bits that stand out. We're going to show you two different ways of cracking and winnowing, meaning breaking down to the pieces and then separating the two. One is more manual, the other one is using more of a machine. In the more manual method, obviously you could just take by hand and like Celine is separating the husk. This would work if you're making a handful of cacao. if you're going into larger quantities enough to actually produce some bars to share with your friends, the way to upgrade from that is breaking using a Ziploc bag or a fabric bag ideally, so you can continue to reuse it, and just going to town on it with a stick or a rolling pin to break it to little pieces. Do you want to demonstrate that? We separate this process to two parts. Everybody separates this process to two parts: cracking and winnowing. To really get all the skin off, you want to make sure everything is in small sections, and then apply air pressure to it so the light parts, the husks, fly away and you're left with the nibs. There's very many ways of doing this, from pulling air and pushing air. The most simple method is using a fabric bag. We're using a plastic bag so you guys can see what's happening inside. And as we break these beans, we end up with all these parts that then a hairdryer is applied to get rid of the husk. This is obviously good at small scale. As you grow and try to make more, there's going to be a turning point where it's very time consuming and it makes a huge mess. If you're doing it at home, I recommend doing it inside your shower with the closed door. It's much easier to clean afterwards. Moving on, the next method is a little bit more mechanical. And today I'm going to show you how to use a champion juicer and a sieve winnower. The champion juicer takes the place of the fabric/plastic bag. It breaks the cacao into pretty consistent sizes, which actually winnow a little bit better. This is actually a method we're still using today at our scale. Do you want to explain?
Yeah, so the next step once you cracked with the juicer or in the bag, depending how you want to crack, you have to use a process that uses air power to remove the husk. So this machine is made by John Nancy from Chocolate Alchemy. It's basically PVC pipe that connects to a vacuum cleaner. And the idea is to pour cacao through here, and then the air from the air suction from the vacuum cleaner will suck the husk in and leave the nibs into the bowl.
Well, once you have a mix of husk and nib, as in you've cracked your cacao and it's all together in one container, you want to separate them. So the first thing I'd recommend doing is to sieve it, especially if you're using a crude way of cracking them like us. That powder could stick to the husk and make it behave like a nib. It weighs it down so it doesn't get winnowed. So by sieving it, you're just increasing your hit rate. This machine or similar machines use a similar mechanism that would work with air pushing against gravity. In the same tube, in the same container, the mix is falling down with gravity. What happens is that the nibs can push against the air and fall down, and the husk can fly somewhere else. You could have a pipe that goes like that into a separate container. You could also use an opposite mechanism that uses air suction instead of air pushing. What's important is to end up with nibs without husk. If some of your nibs end up in your husk, you can pick them out or you can just waste a little bit, but what's important is to not end up with husk in your nib. If you end up with husk in your nib, your chocolate's not going to be as great.
So after cracking and winnowing, we end up with cacao nibs, and this is basically what we use to make chocolate. So this is the key machine. It's a conching machine. It's actually originally an Indian machine used to make dosa. And what it is, it's basically a stone mill. So it's a stone that rubs against stone, and that's going to crack the cacao. So we said before, the cacao behaves a bit like a nut. It's half fat, half solid. So what this machine does is that it brings out the fat and makes it into a liquid, a bit like when you make a nut butter.
What we have here, nibs, as in cacao which has been roasted and taken the husk off. This is essentially unrefined 100% chocolate. So if I was to eat this or eat 100% chocolate, all that's happened in between them is that it spends some time being ground up. So there's a few things we can control here. This machine does two things. Number one is obviously with the pressure, it reduces the particle size over time. The other thing is that with the friction, it increases the temperature gently over time. So refining and conching, that's the terms. When we first add the nibs into the machine, we have the spring here tightened all the way down. That's to really decrease the size of the particles to as small as possible, so you end up with something smooth and creamy. After about 24 hours, depending on the maker, some people do it after 12 hours, we start adding whatever we want to add to it. So if we wanted to add a flavor, let's say strawberry, we would take dehydrated strawberries and put them into here. If you make plain chocolate, which is most of what we do, at this level, you just add your sugar. 75% chocolate means 75% cacao, 25% of the total amount sugar. So let's say you're making 1 kilogram of chocolate, 750 grams of nibs, and 250 grams of sugar. After it's been a certain amount of time and we reach the size of particle, the smoothness that we're looking for, but we want to develop the flavor further. Let's say it's still a little bit acidic, we want to lose that. We then loosen the spring a tiny bit, just to take the wheels off the ground and reduce that pressure. We don't want to squish these particles until they're flat, they stick to your teeth. Other things you can do are, you could keep the lid on the machine, you could take the lid off the machine. What that does, strangely enough, is actually contain the flavor or let the flavor leak to the air, which we found out by running it for 3 days without the lid and ending up with pretty boring tasting chocolate. Something else you can do is the time you add the sugar, somehow locks the flavors in, which means if a couple hours in you're really happy about the flavor but you want to continue developing the particle size or something else, put in the sugar and lock it in. The one thing you want to watch out for is you don't want the sugar to be in there for too long, because sugar, especially in a humid country like Hong Kong, because sugar on a molecular level loves water and it pulls in water into it, adding moisture to the chocolate, which in general you don't want ever at all. A drop of water can ruin a bucket of chocolate. So we try to blend our sugar so it's very fine, so it needs to spend the smallest amount of time in the machine. We put it in about 12 hours just to be safe, that we could go lower once blending it before removing it from here and starting the next step.
Yeah, also people ask us how long do we conch our cacao for. This is really up to the maker. Like, you have to experiment and see what works for your cacao. The general rule is 12 to 24 hours. This is when the chocolate is technically refined and ready to eat. But as Amit said, you want to maybe leave it longer to develop the flavor. So you have to experiment. Like, we started with 24 hours, then we went up to 62 hours, and now we're back around 48 hours. So you have to play around with it and test, like constantly taste the chocolate really to see what's right for you.
What I recommend is taking samples every few hours and then comparing them at the end.
Yeah. Also additives, so if we don't add any cacao butter or soy lecithin, but if you do, cacao butter helps with like tempering and makes the chocolate smoother. Lecithin also helps with tempering and keeping the chocolate in the same condition for a long time. So if you want to add those, you need to add it at this stage as well, probably after 12 hours. This is a time where you want to add your spices, your herbs, your teas, or any of inclusion really, while the chocolate is conching. This means that the flavor will be fully integrated with the chocolate and it will not have any texture. This is also the time where you want to add your milk powder if you want to make milk chocolate. The ratio is usually 5 to 20% milk powder. It's obvious, but you want to use milk powder because any liquid will destroy the chocolate. Also, milk powder is very low on fat, so you might want to add some cacao butter to make the texture right. For sugar, you have a choice of different types of sugar. Traditionally, chocolate makers use organic raw cane sugar, which is the type that we use. But you could also use coconut palm sugar, stevia, and other sweetening, as long as it has no water. So people have been trying to use honey as well, but it's quite hard because you need to dehydrate the honey. If there is any type of moisture in the sugar, it will just club the chocolate and it will become too viscous. So actually viscosity is something you need to watch out as well for the chocolate. If it has too much husk, or if the particles are too big, the chocolate will be too viscous. That means it will be too thick and it might clog the machine and you can't work with it. So One way around this is either refining for longer or using cacao butter to make it a bit more fluid.
We're going to talk about tempering now. Chocolate is not a solid, it's not a liquid. It's a bunch of particles suspended in a fluid and arranged in a certain way that holds them together in a chain. There's 5 different shapes that you can make the particles arrange in. There's a 6th one. If you go to shape number 5 and you wait a year, it rearranges in shape 6. Don't worry about that one. We're concerned with the first 5. Now this sounds very complicated, but really you need to understand this theory to be able to troubleshoot. The actions themselves are quite simple. All we're doing in tempering is taking the chocolate up and down in temperature to arrange these particles the correct way. The different arrangements, polymorphic shapes, have different melting points, different amount of energy which, when inflicted, break the bonds. So we want the strongest one. We want shape number 5. Shape number 5 melts at about 33 degrees, 31 to 33 degrees, which is wonderful for inside your body, melts in your mouth, but not the room, which means you can pick it up, you can look at it, it doesn't melt right away. The other important thing is that you want everything in the chocolate to be in the same shape, so that it's completely interlocked and smooth, stable. Imagine when you left a chocolate bar in your car or in your purse and it melted and you put it back in the fridge and it came out and it looked like it went off. It was white on the surface, it was gooey and soft. What happened is that you now have a random array of clusters that don't necessarily link together very well. So the fat and the sugar bloom to the surface. It's still fine to eat. That happened to your chocolate bar, it's still perfectly fine to eat. If you really want to retemper it, you can do that. But if you just want to enjoy it, enjoy it. I personally don't mind untempered chocolate. I think chocolate without any particles has a really fudgy quality about it. It's really fun, but you need to make conscious and immediately refrigerate it to retain that. Otherwise it will start creating these shapes. So what we do is, first of all, bring the temperature up to 45 degrees, breaking all the bonds, meaning that all the particles are just floating about in the fluid. Then we go down to, this is a range, and every chocolate is different, and if you buy chocolate from scratch, it's going to give you the instructions. If you make it from bean to bar, really you have to try and error this to figure out the following temperatures, but they go within ranges. To go up, we go up to 45, everything is fluid, we keep it there for a while just to make sure. Then we go down to what we use is 28 degrees. Some people would go lower, some people would go higher by maybe 2 degrees from that, by which we create shape 5 and shape 4. We want to give shape 5 time to, as crystals do, crystallize and propagate throughout the mass of chocolate. So if we go just to 5, we're only creating a few. We want to go a little bit lower to give it time to go everywhere. But we then have shape 4, which we don't want. So we're going up to 45, down to 28, and then up to 31 to break 4 and maintain 5. What we do at this stage is refrigerate the chocolate, not too cold, something like a wine fridge. I would say, I've heard higher temperature being said to us, but we found somewhere between 7 and maybe 11 degrees is a nice sweet spot. You want a very dry fridge for that. So then, again, we go up to 45, down to 28, up to 31, and we just have some shape 5. And then we cool down consistently, allowing the crystals to propagate and give us a nice, shiny, snappy chocolate bar that is solid at room temperature. And when you put it in your mouth, it melts and it's rich and soft. Ways you can make that easier is, for example, the more fat you have, the easier the time the crystals have to get into the right shape. So some people add cacao butter. If you cannot get your chocolate to temper and you're really struggling with this and you need it to be ready tomorrow, add 1 to 5% of cacao butter out of the total mass. Take into account what you're going to add when you calculate that. And that's going to make your life a bit easier. If you look at, I don't want to name brands, but if you look at some commercial brands that are known for being very rich and soft, and they add a lot of cacao butter to make their life easier and to make the chocolate very melty. The disadvantage in that is that cacao butter is made from generic cacao. We're going for a terroir, a particular flavor. So you're watering down the taste a little bit. The cacao butter obviously is already present in cacao. Cacao is made up of about 50% butter. That could be off by 1 to 2% in either direction, depending on which type. The rest is starches and proteins. If you get chocolate which is naturally very low in cacao butter, it makes sense you'd want to add some. Try first to do it without adding anything, and then get playful with it. Maybe you prefer the texture. Maybe you want a very soft chocolate. It's completely down to you. You're also slightly lowering the melting temperature by adding cacao butter, but you are assisting yourself in creating something that looks very nice, and on the first time you'll get good results as opposed to otherwise.
So the different ways you can temper chocolate, I think the easiest one is seeding. So this is when you have an already tempered bar of chocolate, and you take at least, you would melt 3/4 of it and keep 1/4 of the bar, and add the solid pieces to the melted chocolate. And this will help the crystal propagate and temper the rest of the chocolate bar. Now, most of us who make chocolate don't actually have tempered chocolate on hand. So the second way you can temper your chocolate, and it's probably the easiest way to do it at home, is to use a double boiler, what we call a bain-marie in French. And the idea is that the steam will heat up the chocolate to about 40-45 degrees. If you go too high, the protein will cook, and then you cannot work with your chocolate. So you heat it up to 45 degrees, and then, as Amit said, you need to cool it down to form the crystal. So you would put it in a bowl of cold water, ice water ideally, to cool it down, and then you have to bring it back up to the heating point to reach 30 degrees. So you want to use your thermometer to make sure you have the right temperature, because this is crucial for tempering. There's a test you can do actually to see if your chocolate is tempered. We'll show it to you, is to use a spoon to dip into your tempered chocolate, and then after 2-3 minutes you can see if the spoon sets, then your chocolate is ready to be tempered. Then the most traditional way is to use marble countertop. So the marble is cool, and it will do the same thing. It will cool down your chocolate. So for this method, you pour down 2/3 of the chocolate on the counter, spread it thin on the counter to cool down, and move it around. So then you want to cool it down to 27 degrees, and then put it back to the rest of the chocolate. Mix it in well to propagate the crystal, and it should be around 30-31 degrees, and that should be tempered. The last way you can temper is actually using a machine. So here today we have a countertop machine, but in the factory we actually use a continuous tempering machine, which is much bigger. We can temper about 15 kilo of chocolate, so this is a smaller version. This machine works using light to heat up the chocolate, but it's the same process. We'll heat it up to 45, then bring it down to 28 and up to 31. So this takes a bit of time, but it does a good job, and it's pretty reliable.
When your chocolate is being tempered and you've got different types of crystals in there, the instability is not the only concern. Imagine if you were building a Lego castle and some of the bricks were actually made of ice at room temperature. Even though the majority of that castle is fine, it's going to topple over. So you want to think about your chocolate bar in the same terms. You want everything to be consistently made out of a material that at room temperature, or in a shape that at room temperature can keep itself solid.
Once the chocolate is tempered, it's time to go into the mold. So this could be a variety of different things. If you're making a chocolate bunny, it's going to be a different mechanism. If you're making bonbon, it's going to be a different mechanism. We're making a chocolate bar. Our chocolate bars are actually made 4 in the same mold, and they break the same way that you'd break cubes of a chocolate bar. I think it gives a nice finish and a nice broken side to every bar. Celine is going to pour our tempered chocolate into the mold and make sure that it's covering everything and that there's no air bubbles to the best of our abilities within the chocolate by tapping it. There's 3 ways we can add inclusions into chocolate. One is during the refining stage, and that's when we mill it into it for only flavor, 0 texture. Another one is to mix it into the tempered chocolate in that bowl. Let's say nuts that add texture inside. And thirdly, and this is what we're doing this time, is adding things on top of the chocolate. So one side of the bar has the flavor and the texture and everything, and the other one doesn't.
So one thing that is very important with the mold is that the mold needs to be at the same temperature as the chocolate. If it's too cold or too hot, it will likely leave a mark on your bar. So that's crucial. Also, the mold is very delicate, so you cannot wash it with soap. You need to wash it with hot water and then make sure it stays shiny with, just need to wipe it with a cloth, really.
Another thing is what the mold is made of is important. So when you're starting, you're probably going to put your chocolate on parchment paper. It's perfectly fine. If you want to use a store-bought mold, silicone, also perfectly fine. But silicone would leave a demolding mark in the center of the mold. If you got a lot of texture on it, it's fine. If not, it might choke. If you're doing it at home, great. If you're doing it at a restaurant, you might want to invest in some polycarbonate mold. They're more expensive, but they are the industry standard.
Okay, so now we put it in the fridge and wait for it to set. So this should take about 20 minutes. So when the chocolate is out of the fridge and when it's ready, you can actually look under the mold and you can see the pattern of the mold. So this is when you know the chocolate is ready. When the chocolate is in the fridge, it will contract, and so it will come out of the mold very easily. That's it. So now you can make your bars. Now, once you have your bars, packaging is quite key for chocolate. So chocolate is very sensitive to humidity and light. So you want to favor a packaging that is covering the bar in terms of light and humidity. We use envelopes like this, so they're airtight and no humidity can come in. The most traditional way would be foil, so wrapping the bar into a foil and then covering it with whatever material you want, really.